Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tim. This is another Real Ideal Gear review, and today we're looking at the Seiko SKA791. I'm calling it the Emerald because it has this beautiful green sunburst emerald dial, and I got to tell you, this watch is a killer. I've been on a string of some really good watches lately from AliExpress and now Seiko, and I'm not going to hide the fact that this watch is going to score very high on my evaluation and the uses that I have for it and just the everyday wear that I've had for the past week or so. So let's go through this watch on the 5 things we typically go through: size, fitment, finish, accuracy, legibility, and lume, and see where this watch really ends up at the end, because I have a feeling this is going to be at or very close to a 10 out of 10. So let's get started with the review. So let's talk a little bit about the history of this movement. In 1986, the Kinetic movement was introduced by Seiko, and in 1988, it was commercially available in watches. By 1997, the Kinetic name was the official name of the movement. Prior to that, it was called the AGS movement, or the Auto Generating Quartz movement. By 2022, the Kinetic movement had kind of run its course, and Seiko decided to start to phase out this movement in favor of the spring drive. So you're going to see fewer and fewer of these movements on the market as time goes by. So if you're a watch collector, it might be a wise idea to go out there and pick up a few of these Kinetic movement watches. The size of this watch is a 42 millimeter diameter case. It has 11 millimeters off the wrist, and it has a 22 millimeter strap. The proportions of this watch are beautiful. I love the proportions of the watch. The lug to lug, the diameter of the case, the height off the wrist, the strap, the width of the strap, all things together. It's on the larger side of watches, but it's not unusually chunky or tall off the wrist. So it has really a nice, refined sport watch look to it, which I really like as far as the proportions and the size goes. It's a lighter weight watch because this has a kinetic quartz movement in it, so you don't have a lot of the weight that you might have with some other heavier sport watches that have the automatic movement. And for a larger size sports watch, the proportions of this watch are fantastic. Now, what about the fitment of this watch? I love the fitment of this watch. The strap on this watch is kind of this vinyl leather laminate. I'm not exactly sure what the top layer is. It feels a little bit like a vinyl maybe, or a plastic, or some kind of fake leather. But at the same time, the spacing of the holes on the strap are closer together. You get a very, very good fit, and it's a very comfortable fit overall. I just love wearing this watch. The leather underneath the laminate is very soft and supple, so you really don't notice the fact that maybe the strap is on the cheaper side of the wallet, and I don't mind that too much. But it is something that I'm kind of like, I kind of wished it was more of a genuine leather strap all the way around. But at the same time, the fit of this watch is fantastic. It's a lighter weight watch. The fitment of all the parts, everything, there's nothing loose on the watch at all. The crown itself is easy to grab. It's the right size. It has a great texture on it. So overall, the fitment of this watch, I think, is fantastic, minus the strap quality. We'll get to that in just a minute. Now let's go to the finish. The finish of this watch is incredible. Now, it has a hardlex crystal, which is kind of the typical thing for a Casio watch at this price point especially. It has a fixed bezel, so you're not going to be able to rotate the bezel for any kind of timing functions, but I love the numbering that's on the bezel. You have a push-pull crown, so easy, back and forth movement on the crown is not something you have to screw down. Sometimes, for me, when it comes to the screwing crowns, sometimes you don't quite get the threads on. I'm a little bit nervous about the threads, cross-threading a little bit or something like that. So to me, this is great. Plus, you get 100 meters of water resistance. So push-pull crown, 100 meters of water resistance. And you see this a lot with the Seiko 5 series, where they had the push-pull crown, where they used to have the screw-in crown with the SKX. But you still get the 100 meters of water resistance. So to me, it's all fine. It's actually an easier crown to manipulate. And again, the size of this crown is the perfect size. Now, the hands on this watch are awesome. It's a sword-style handset. You have the hour markers in there that are white with kind of a gold gilting around them. And the handset and the hour markers have this like faceting to it that really kind of gives off some different angles of reflected light, which I think is fantastic. So you get this little bit of flash of gold in there, nothing really big. I'm not a huge fan of gold watches, but I don't mind a little bit of gold gilting inside the watch, especially on the dial, because that's where the focus should be. Now the dial itself has this awesome, incredible sunburst dial, and there's two different facets to this. So this whole faceting theme kind of goes throughout the dial, not just on the hour markers, not just on the handset, but on the dial itself. There's two different facets to the reflective surfaces of the dial. The date window, I think, does a very effective job. And there's this nice little red triangle next to the date window, which, if you've watched any of my videos, I love a little splash of color here and there inside the dial, or on the second hand especially. And this triangle next to the date window is just the perfect, I don't know, accent next to the date window. It draws your attention to the date window, like, here it is, but it's not overly proud. It's not something that really takes over the dial of the watch. Now, the date window, or the date wheel itself, is color matched, so you get a nice, I don't know, even transition between the date wheel back to the dial itself. Minimal print, you have the Seiko, and you have the Kinetic movement, and you have 100 meters of water resistance underneath. So the dial is not really that cluttered. I don't think it's cluttered at all. I think the dial looks nice and clean. It's got that awesome reflective surface, and it really looks sharp. You have the bezeled edge for the minute track, and you also have, again, a great bezel on the outside when it comes to just the 60-minute markers that are on the outside. Again, the bezel doesn't move, but it's nice to see the minute markers out there, and it's just a nice touch. And I think the color, the black color on the outside bezel, gives it just a little bit more of a dimensional feel, three-dimensional feel when it comes to color on the watch itself. Now, moving out to the case, you have a brushed surface on the top side of the lugs, and you also have a high polished finish on the side of the case. So you have kind of this brushed finish, you have the high polish, you have, again, more texture, more just kind of a three-dimensional feel to the overall case. You have that same three-dimensional feel inside the dial, and then the bezel itself adds a little different twist, or a little different perspective, I think, overall. And the matching of all of these components together really make the dial and the watch case itself very interesting to look at. On the underside of the case, you have a display window for the kinetic movement. Take a look at this movement. You get to see some parts of a kinetic movement, which I think are fascinating. So let's talk a little bit about accuracy. The movement in this watch is the 5M82. It's a kinetic movement, and the interesting thing about this movement is that it has a 6-month power reserve. So once you get this up to fully charged, you're going to have about a 6-month power reserve before this watch actually shuts down. Basically what you have is an alternator and a battery, just like you'd find in a car. And you can see where the rotor, as it spins around, is going to spin another wheel that's going to generate the electricity, which is eventually stored in the battery. Now, my understanding is that this battery will last about 10 years, maybe 20 years, but somewhere in that time frame. The manual says about 6 to 10 years, but I've been reading online, a lot of these batteries are going 10 plus years. So I would say about 10 years is what you're going to get off the shelf life of this battery. And then you may have to bring this into a watchmaker to have the battery replaced. Let's talk a little bit about legibility and lume. Legibility of this watch is fantastic. When you look at this watch, you can see that the bright white hour markers, the bright white handset, and the darker dial, the darker green dial, that also turns lighter and darker depending on the position of the light source, really has a high contrast, high legibility background to it. Now, the 12 o'clock marker has the double baton, so you can easily identify this watch if it's sitting on the nightstand. You can definitely reference this watch in the middle of the night. And that is also dependent on the lume, which is incredible. Great lume, lasts all night. Several nights I've worn this through the night, and it lasts about 9 hours plus. And I can easily see this without my glasses on in the morning. So yes, this is one of the better lumed watches that I've seen Seiko make. Now, what's that pusher at the 2 o'clock position? The pusher at the 2 o'clock position is the power reserve indicator. When that button is pressed, the second hand will stop and will move, and there is a diagram here anywhere from the original starting position of the second hand to basically 30 seconds across the dial. If it goes across the dial to the 32nd position, directly across from where it was started, that means you have a 6-month power reserve. So what are the uses for this watch? I think this is a great casual watch. I think this is a great professional watch. You could probably get away with this for a semi-formal occasion. It's a little bit more of a sporty watch. So for me, the negatives on this watch are just a couple of things. Number one, It's the Hardlex crystal. Not a fan of the Hardlex crystal. It's kind of the way it is with Seiko at this price point especially. And the second thing is it's a cheaper strap. That whatever that laminate leather thing is going on here, not a huge fan of it. I'm going to probably, like I said, replace it with an actual genuine leather strap. But overall, I do like the look of it. I'm going to hang on to it. I'm in no rush to replace it. It's not that bad. It's just one of those things where I fear over time, once that whatever that coating is on the leather gets scratched, it may not look all that natural and all that good anyway. So I'll just keep my eye out for a strap for this watch. Positives to this watch, definitely the design, the dial, the bezel, the crown, the movement. I love this kinetic movement, and again, you can see that through the display window in the back. The multifaceted dial, the multifaceted handset, the markers, just the different reflections of light that you get off the dial of this watch is incredible. So this to me is one of those great sport watches under $170. And also one last final thing, that little red triangle next to the date window. What a fantastic touch. I just think it's one of those small things. I have to say it again. I just think it's one of those like kind of gotcha moments, like caught you looking at this watch a little bit closer. Yeah, you're really liking this watch. So to me, there's a lot of great things about this watch. So what's the rating of this watch? It's a 9.9 out of 10. Highly, highly recommend this watch. Go out and find one. They're, again, under 170 bucks on Amazon. You get a kinetic movement. You can see it through the display case back on the back. Good timekeeping watch. And as far as I know, the complaints about kinetic movements not being able to be fully wound, mine is fully wound. I'm getting 100%, which is a 6-month power reserve off of that power reserve indicator, which is the second hand. So to me, the kinetic movement is operating as it should. It's a little bit loud when you're winding it, but at the same time, unless you're doing like calisthenics or aerobics or some kind of heavy movement where you're throwing your wrist around with the watch on it, you're really not going to notice the sound of the watch. Just like any other watch that has a rotor on it, you're really not going to notice it once it's on the wrist. So to me, this is a great watch. Highly recommend it. Check out my website, realidealgear.com, for all review watches that I have for sale there. My name is Tim. This has been another Real Ideal Gear review. We'll catch you guys next time. And it's just overall, for a larger sized watch, great